Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Bismillah, alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalam ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Welcome everybody from around the world. My name is Bilal Abdul Kareem, and this is the BAK Show. We are here to discuss the things that are important to you and to the Muslim Ummah. Today is a very difficult day. We're going to be talking about what's been going on in the Palestinian territories, Gaza to be exact. We are broadcasting live, and we want to let everybody know that they can send in their questions, their comments, their concerns. We would love to hear from you. Tonight is a different night. This is one of the blessed nights of Ramadan. So we ask everybody to keep their brothers and sisters in the Palestinian territories in their du'as. Now, after having said that, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of the country known as Israel, has unilaterally decided to end the ceasefire agreement, which was brokered by the United States, Qatar, and Egypt. It was approximately 2 months ago that the ceasefire agreement was hammered out and was agreed to, and there had been relative, I'm using this word very, very loosely, relative calm in Gaza, which doesn't mean it was calm, it was just relative to what was going on previously. However, since that time, consistently, Benjamin Netanyahu and members of his government were very, very clear that withdrawing from the Gaza Strip was not an option. But that's what they agreed to, but they made it clear that they weren't going to do that. So they actually never had any real intentions on fulfilling the ceasefire. Since that was, the ceasefire was declared to be null and void and dead, a whopping 412 Palestinians have been killed, 60 of them children, 500 injured. Those numbers are just for starters. And the Defense Ministry of Israel has warned that that's only the beginning. Now, look, we're going to talk about how this is perceived. A lot of people around the world might be thinking that, look, man, if Hamas would just return the hostages, everything's going to be cool. Everything would be okay. Well, you got to look at this thing from another angle. They agreed that this was going to happen in stages. Phase 1 had basically ended. Phase 2 would see the return and release of the hostages and the bodies, and in exchange for a permanent withdrawal and an end to the war. That was what was supposed to happen. That was never going to be implemented by the Israelis. So I ask you a question. Let's talk business here for a second. If the people are living under the rockets and bombs once again in the Gaza Strip, and the hostages are still there, the protesters are still in Tel Aviv in protesting to bring home the bodies and the live hostages which have been held since the October 7th attacks. I want you to imagine, what if Hamas didn't have hostages? What would that look like? Nuclear war? A total annihilation of the Palestinian population? Because with the hostages, there hasn't been any type of taking of the ceasefire agreement seriously. What about if there were no hostages? They would so you're saying that the Palestinian people would simply just have to rely on the mercy of Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump? That's really what you're looking at. So before people around the world might be thinking that, look, just give the hostages back and everything's going to be fine. No, everything is not going to be fine, because you have to understand something, that what the Israelis are doing now are the actions which led up to October the 7th, 2023, and the attacks that took place at that time. That's what led up to that. Some people think that history began October 7th, and it didn't. The reality of the situation is that that the Israeli actions and the occupation is what led to where we are today. We're talking 412 people killed in a 24-hour period, 60 of them children, 500 injured. These are staggering numbers, but that doesn't tell the whole story. And we're going to get more into that in a moment. Just want to let everybody know, listen, brothers and sisters, you can send in your questions, your comments, your concerns. We want to hear from you. We are broadcasting live, and we need to discuss some of these issues. Now, the issue that we need to discuss here today, what is the reaction from the Muslim world, the Arab world, to be exact, because it's right in the Arab-dominated Middle East? Condemnation. That's it. We condemn in the strongest possible terms, is what they are saying around the different capitals. We're talking about Cairo to Abu Dhabi to Qatar and to other places. And that's it. That's all they're going to do, is just condemn. Guys, the Israelis want everything. They don't seem to be able to see that. They don't want to see that. They're just hoping that this whole thing is going to end at some point and it's just going to kind of blow over. Well, you know what? It's not. Because Israeli troops are in Syria as well. They're not just going to walk away and leave. That's going to lead to war throughout the Middle East. And that is what the world should want to prevent. But the apathy that the world powers are showing is going to lead directly to that. And then I think at that time, you'll start hearing words again like terrorists. When you fight back and you resist, these are just some terrorists or some dead enders and such like that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. It's a really, really difficult situation for the brothers and sisters in the Palestinian territories. Really, guys, keep them in your du'as. Now, we're going to get into some of the questions which have been sent in here. But first, I would like to talk to you very briefly about a project that we're working on. We are working on a project here called Voices of Truth. Voices of Truth is a video testimony of the victims who were terrorized and the families of those family members who were disappeared, tortured, and in some cases, those who did the torturing, basically documenting the crimes that took place by the Assad regime, by the people who were most affected. Sometimes, after a few years, you'll find that people want to change history and say that, oh, Bashar al-Assad was a big helper to the Palestinian cause, which he wasn't, never fired a single shot, and that he was really a good leader. And then you will find that history will repeat itself again. We are here and working to make sure, inshallah ta'ala, that does not happen. Even now, on social media, I'm seeing a new narrative that the hundreds of thousands of Syrians which were killed is you have some Assadists out there who are saying, yeah, well, Bashar al-Assad was a bad guy, but the rebels, they killed half of them. The rebel forces had no weapons of mass destruction. Rebel forces had no planes. Rebel forces didn't even have tanks until they took them from the regime. So we need you to help us with this project. Here, what we'd like for you to do, take a look at our campaign that you can find it on medina.com/voices of truth, medina.com/voices of truth. And there you can find our crowdfunding page. Brothers and sisters, if you can donate $10 or $20, we would be happy. So please, this is a family affair. You guys are all a part of the family. We need your help. Medina.com/voices of truth. I am spearheading this project, and I hope you're going to join us in it. Now, let's get back to some of the questions or issues that were raised. Okay, we've got here Amin Baller. If ISIS was in Gaza instead of Hamas, would the result be different? No, I don't think that the result would be, yes, I do think the result would be different. It would be significantly worse. Having brutal, takfiri-oriented people is not a good thing, because you would have a mix of Israeli and Palestinian blood flowing through the streets, and who benefits from that? Brothers and sisters, let me give it to you straight. I lived with and understand those people who eventually went on to be ISIS members in Syria. I knew those people. I knew them personally. Maybe a lot of people out there don't know them personally. But when you have weapons in the hands of people who have painfully very little Islamic knowledge, you are setting up a big mix that's going to explode in the faces of the Muslims. So no, brothers and sisters, you do not want to have ISIS back in any Muslim territory, and that's real. Okay, let's take a look and let's see here. And do you think is a war between Jews and Christians allying against, as it says in the Quran in Surah Al-Ma'idah? I don't think I understand that question here. And do you think is a war between Jews and Christians? Well, I don't see the Christians at war with the Jews right now. So I'm not sure I completely understand what you're saying here. So maybe you can send us another message and help us to understand. Harish says, please tell me, I need to know something about the prisoner in the hands of Kurds. I saw a documentary on Sky News about them. They were not allowed to be told that the Assad regime fell. I did not see that documentary, but I do want to let everybody know something, and I want to be clear on this. All of the prisons were not opened. All the prisons in Syria were not opened. As the regime was falling, remnants of the regime took high-value prisoners to different locations. One of those locations, as far as we understand, to be in the Latakia area. Hence, that was the region that the Alawite militia forces attacked the forces which were loyal to the new government in Damascus. So we know that those prisoners are still being held prisoner. All the prisons, the major prisons, the ones that most people know about, those prisoners were freed. But the regime was falling, and the regime knew it, even though its foot soldiers out there in the different areas weren't privy to it. But when the regime fell, certain high-value prisoners were taken, and we know and we understand that. And we're following that up, and we're not going to let it go. Okay. Don't you think if they gave the hostages and it would eliminate any excuse to continue the attack on the Palestinians? Well, we just kind of talked about that. No, I don't think that. The reality of the situation is that there was a ceasefire agreement that was in place, and the Israelis didn't respect it. They didn't. Why would you think that if they gave away the only bargaining chip that they have, that the Israelis would respect that? They absolutely positively wouldn't. They haven't respected any agreement that they've made. They unilaterally pulled out of this agreement. In addition to that, they moved the goalposts. What they did is the Hostages were supposed to be released, a number of them in the first phase that was done, and then the second phase, because there are still 59 hostages. I think, let's see if I have the numbers here. We have 24 living hostages and 35 bodies. What was supposed to take place in the second phase, that most of those were supposed to be released. But Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu all of a sudden said, no, you got to release all the hostages right now. What was the point of the whole ceasefire agreement? If you're going to change the goalpost and just say, no, you know what, forget about that agreement, everything, we want all the hostages right now. That would be your only bargaining chip. So releasing the hostages at this phase under these conditions with no guarantor, because America's not can't be a guarantor, they're aiding and abetting and funding and arming against the Palestinians. They are not an honest broker. So the question would be, we're giving the prisoners back so they wouldn't have an excuse. They didn't have an excuse to level 90% of the buildings in Gaza. There has never been a war where 100% of the population has been displaced. So, no, to answer that question, nah, man, nah, no way. Okay, we've got Money Pro Music who says, Israel chipping away the Arab states one by one, and no one dared to say S-H-I-T. Well, I can't use the type of language that you use because, you know, my mother might be watching the show. But I get your sentiment, I get your point. The Arab regimes are thinking that they want this whole thing just to go away, that somehow they're going to be safe. They want to make peace with Israel. Come on, you know, let's just end this. What, you want to kill some Palestinians? What? Quick, get it over with. That's basically what we're seeing from the Arab regimes. We're not seeing that there's a call to arms. Egypt has always been touted as this big Middle Eastern military power, but we ain't seen it. Have we seen it? No. $3.5 billion worth of military aid and other aid goes to Egypt from the United States of America. Why? Because they buy their silence. That's the reality of the situation. And without America, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi wouldn't last 10 days. I'm telling you, I'm being real with you. So you've got Egypt in the area. You've got Qatar, who actually hosts the largest military base in the entire Middle East for American forces, the Odeid military base in Qatar. So you can see that there are so many of the Muslim leaders, I'm not going to say Muslim countries, I'm going to say the Muslim leaders or so-called Muslim leaders who are actually aiding and abetting the enemies of Allah and the enemies of the Palestinian people. So no, nobody dares to say anything because they're all too worried about their own small, separate, individual kingdoms. And that's about as real as it gets. And Allah knows best. All right, next, we've got here. Do you think Turkey, Iran, Syria, Afghanistan will step in to support Palestine more than they have been doing until now? Well, let's look at it like this. Geographically and militarily, the Afghans don't have anything to really support the Palestinians with. After so many years of war, their country has been decimated, and they finally got rid of the Americans and kicked them out, alhamdulillah. But geographically, they are just too far away. Syria is just coming out from a brutal civil war, and they are in a similar situation. While they do have proximity to the Israelis, I don't think militarily they can compete with the Israelis, but that does not mean that I'm sitting here and suggesting that they should sit by idly, because I'm not suggesting that. But I'm being realistic in terms of, you know, the greatest superpower, which is America, at least in this dunya, is arming and aiding and abetting the Israelis. So a lot of that has to be taken into account. But once again, I'm not saying that they should just be left to run rampant. and continue to occupy this territory here in Syria. I'm not saying that. Iran. The Iranians launched 480 projectiles at Syria, at Israel. 300 in April, and in the fall, 180. They didn't kill anybody except one, a Palestinian. How do you fire 480 projectiles? I'm talking about drones, rockets, and missiles. How exactly do you fire all of those at Israel and you didn't kill not a single Israeli soldier? I mean, how do you do that? Well, I've been here in this territory for a long time, and I've been reporting on a lot of different things. And the reality of the situation is this: when the Iranians are aiming at you, they hit. When they're aiming at a school, and they hit it and bring it down on the entire people who are inside of the school, the students, the faculty, and the staff. And other than that, when they're aiming at a hospital, they hit. All of a sudden now, when they're aiming at the Israelis, all of a sudden they can't shoot straight. Where did they go? That's real, brothers and sisters. I mean, look, some people out there, they're not going to like when I talk against the Iranians, but you got to call a spade a spade. Look, after all the stuff that has been going on, they sent 480 projectiles at Israel and didn't kill anybody. Oh, come on, guys. What is this? Is this a clown show? Nah, man. Nah. Okay, let's take a look and see what we've got here. Assalamu alaikum. Would it be good to make hijrah to Yemen in the Sunni areas near Sayyun? I believe. I can't answer that question because while I was in Yemen at one point, I haven't been there for quite some time, so I'm really not sure, man. I can't really advise you on that. Harish is here, and he's back, and he said, should the ISIS prisoners still be in the hands of the Kurds? Let's talk about some of what's going on over there in those Kurdish territories. You've got thousands of women and children who, after the fall of the of ISIS and their reign of terror back in 2018, a lot of those women and children were just picked up in places like Baghouz and other places, and they were put in prison. They are just detained indefinitely. Their countries don't want them back, and many of them are not able to even negotiate for their freedom because there's no real trial for them. Not real. There's no trial for them. All that a lot of these sisters were involved in were just following their husbands and making food for their families. And then when they got picked up by these Kurdish militia forces, they got thrown into, if you want to call it, a legal black hole, but there's really no legality going on here. And so it's not like they're competing laws that are keeping them in place. They're just gone. And that's the reality of the situation. So, sometimes when I'll talk to people and I'll ask them about it, they'll say, oh, but do you know that some of those sisters, they have a very harsh ISIS mentality and stuff like that? First of all, since when do we prosecute people for thought crimes? Do we do stuff like that? No, we don't. You don't prosecute people because you think that they think differently than you. Absolutely, positively not. And then they also say, but what if one of them comes out and carries out a terrorist attack? Well, okay, so then why don't we just go and start locking up all of the members of the United States military when they come out of the service, because they might come out, because with all of their military training, they might come out and go to the mall and shoot some people or something like that. Does that make sense to anybody? Of course it doesn't, but it only makes sense when you're talking about Muslims, and these women and children, they are Muslim, but they have no advocate. And that's the issue that we're facing here. There's no advocate for these people, because when you are hit with a terrorist charge, basically it scares everybody away and nobody wants to deal with you. And that's a big time blight on all of our records as Muslims, particularly people who are in positions of influence. So yes, I am calling for the release of those women and children. They shouldn't have been incarcerated in the first place unless they had blood on their hands, and not because you think that they might have, kind of, coulda, woulda, shoulda in the future carry out some type of attack. Why? because the crime is supposed to come before the punishment, and Allah knows best. As for the men, if they are found to have blood on their hands, then they should be held accountable. For that. Now, okay. Philip says, why are Muslims so outraged when Jews kill Muslims? But when Muslims kill Muslims, like in Syria, Alawites, Sudan, Niger, Mali, Nigeria, Somalia, there is silence. Now, I think you've got this kind of wrong, Philip. There are a lot of nuances in which I think that you're not really privy to. There's a lot that you're really saying here, and we're going to try our best to pick apart a few things, because that would have to be part of a much larger show. But first of all, why are Muslims so outraged when Jews kill Muslims? Well, would you be outraged if some gang killed your son, your brother, your father, your uncle? Of course you would. So let's establish that. The Prophet ﷺ said the Muslim Ummah is like one body. And we feel sadness when we see our brothers and sisters being brutalized and oppressed. So we've established that. Put this to the side. But when Muslims kill Muslims, like in Syria, Alawites, okay, now we have to talk about certain things. This is not just about in Syria there, or just Muslims killing Muslims. I think you've missed most of the Syrian civil war. Everybody whose name is Muhammad or Ahmed or Mustafa does not subscribe to the tenets of the faith of Islam. Did you hear what I said? I'm not being a takfiri here, but you've got people who don't pray, they don't use the Quran and Sunnah to guide their actions or their political decisions or their military affiliations in any way, shape, form, or fashion. So no, we can't just simply say, okay, well, look, his name is Mustafa, his name is Ahmed, it's just Muslims killing Muslims. No, it's not always like that. And that's not really the case. The Alawite sect, while they were also under intense pressure from the Assad regime, had favor over the Sunni Muslims here in Syria. And that's real. That's a reality. Anybody here in Syria will tell you that. So the point that I'm making here is that we can't just use these blanket statements. Now, when we go into Sudan, the RSF was headed, and it is believed that he has been killed by Hemeti. Now, Hemeti was one of the leaders of the Janjaweed. The Janjaweed carried out the genocide in the Darfur areas in the early 2000s. And he just rebranded himself. And all of a sudden now, his background was whitewashed. The United Arab Emirates backed him. And all of a sudden now he was rebranded, and so were his forces. And they began to be called the Rapid Support Forces. But they're the same old Janjaweed. And these people are not fighting for Islam. These people have no connection to Islam. These people have been raping Muslims. So just to say, well, you've got these two groups here. This one calls himself Burhan. This one calls himself Hemeti. They're all Muslims. It's just the Muslims at it again. No, it's not like that. Because they're being bought and paid for by bigger powers. And they don't care anything about Islam as long as the price is right. And that's where we're at. Now, but then it goes on into Niger and Mali, Nigeria, Somalia. There's silence. No, it's not like that. Really, it's not silence. And I think that maybe you need to follow the news a little bit more so that there aren't these blanket generalizations, because there are a lot of nuances that needs to be brought forward, and Allah knows best. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, brother. Is it any chance a coup can happen to move Sisi in Egypt for Palestinian cause? With Allah, everything and anything is possible. With Allah, anything and everything is possible. I will be so happy if the Ummah, could get rid of Abdul Fattah al-Sisi, who has been nothing but a bum and a loser ever since he came to power, and even before that. He hasn't delivered anything to the people of Egypt. Nothing. And they don't want him. But the bigger powers do want him. And once again, you've got another Arab brutal dictatorship that's propped up by outside powers, wherein the leadership has no real legitimacy in the eyes of the people, other than that they have a feared security force that is protecting them. Okay. Dinero says, what are the main groups fighting alongside HTS? Basically, all of the groups are all fighting alongside HTS. So it's not a main group, but all of the groups that were part of the revolutionary forces have joined the government of Abu Muhammad Jolani or Ahmed Shara, and they're all fighting under that banner. Okay. Do you think, Amin Baller says, do you think these monarchs in Middle East will collapse before the liberation of Palestine for hosting the biggest crusade? I hope so. I do. Because they're not helping the Muslims. They're not. They're protecting their own chairs, and it's at the expense of the Ummah. Just look at Africa. Could you imagine the powerhouse that Africa would be if those different countries just came together? Could you imagine what influence they would wield around the world and how it would uplift the people of Africa? Could you imagine that? But when you have big powers like China, who's got what, 1.4 billion people, negotiating with countries that have 1.4 million people, how are you going to negotiate with a power like that? Very difficult. So the point that I'm making here is that I hope that these monarchies get the boot sooner rather than later. All right, we'll take one more. Let's see. Okay. All right. Look, listen, before we go, I want to just ask you guys to do something for me. Please, before you go, take a look at our crowdfunding page for Voices of Truth. It's at medina/voicesoftruth.com. It's right there on your screen. Take a look at it. This is our crowdfunding page for a project that we're working on, where we're documenting the testimonies of the families who were affected by the terror, the years of terror of the Assad regime. This is so that history will never forget what happened to the Syrian people, so it will not be repeated. As they say, those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. We want to make sure that that does not happen, but we need your help. Please visit our crowdfunding page. Take a look at it. I'm heading this project. It's medina.com/voices of truth. I am your host, Bilal Abdul Kareem. We will be back tomorrow night for another episode, and hopefully with better news than we had tonight. Jazakumullah.